So can you see my screen?
No, Ravinder, not yet.
Okay,
Yeah.
all good. So I'll be taking over domain-driven design part while Possible will capturing the test-driven development part. So, so to start off, a bit about myself. So I'm Tarinder. I have been in the industry for around 10 years now. So apart from PHP development, I am an IoT enthusiast. I love IoT devices. I'm into electronics and all. And I also contribute to open source packages, especially if you have used the Filament admin panel. I have created a package for managing roles and permissions. So that's a bit about myself. And so let's get started on domain-driven design. So when it comes to domain-driven design, I think it is one of the most misunderstood and overcomplicated topics in the developer community. So if we try to understand, domain-driven design brings business language much more closer to your code. So in that sense, if I tell you an example, like, have you ever heard, I mean, like if your client or someone, a stakeholder of your project, has asked you to go into a specific controller. So let's say you go into the product controller and I need an attribute called color as an object inside my database. You won't hear that, right? Your client would tell you, hey, I need this color, these colors to be displayed on the product page. So something like that. So when that becomes the norm. So that's why we try to bring the business language into the code base. So within domain-driven design, we talk about two things: strategic and technical design. So strategic design is, I think, the most important aspect of this. Yes, technical, we know that when we write code, it's all to do with technical stuff. So the technical design gives you tools to make this feasible. Um, so we will get into, so what we do mainly is we deal with data. Most of the time it's to do with data. So usual way what happens in a PHP, in the PHP world or any other application, a request comes in, the business layer processes the data, the database layer inserts the data, and you return a response. So if you consider a typical API, it do the same. So in this, so when it comes to data with PHP, PHP is not the best at manipulating data. I mean, it's only arrays, right? I mean, Java has different data structures, but PHP has only associative arrays to solve all these problems. So even if if it's a hash map, a tree, or a list, queue, everything is handled with the only data structure that is available, associative arrays. So when you get into associative arrays, the problem is that it is not actually, you can throw anything inside an associative array. So there may be objects, there may be classes, strings, numbers, anything. So when a request becomes large, or incoming data or the data you process becomes large, it's going to be really difficult to handle this. So rather than using arrays in a request, so you can use other aspects, other methods to handle this. So the first way of dealing with data is to use value objects. So a value object is an elementary class that contains mainly scalar data, but not only scalar data. But the main thing about this is it does not identify any entity. So because it doesn't have an ID, it's not mutable as well. So you cannot change anything. You can see in this specific class that all these attributes are only readable, only read only, and this also formats, if you see, there is, sorry. So it formats the data that gets into this, and it represents value as a percentage, right? So, yeah. So, so the advantages are it encapsulates the logic and handles null values as well. You can see. Also, you always have two decimal places in this example, and also when it comes to types, it has better type handling, because what I'm saying by different better types is it actually returns, you have type hinting. So in this specific method, it gives you an average click rate. So it returns a percent object. So rather than returning a numerical value, it returns an object. So it encapsulates everything. So instead of taking a float value, just a float value, you make it a first class citizen using a percent value, and you return it. So let me take to the next one. So next is data transfer objects. So when it comes to data transfer objects, it's pretty much about transferring data within your application as a whole, or maybe within your classes. Okay. So if we consider an example, I will show you an example. So this is the typical way of handling a request, right? So I guess you are familiar with Laravel. So this is not much to do with Laravel though, but I'm using Laravel here for the ease of explanation. So when a request comes in, uh, here the scenario is about creating a hotel. If you think of you are creating a travel engine or something, so we have hotels as an entity. So hotel can have many rooms, and hotel can have many amenities as well. So when you're creating a hotel, it takes in certain parameters, and then it creates the hotel, and the related rooms are also created here, and also the related amenities are also attached so that you can display those the website itself. But the problem here is when this gets complicated, I mean, when there are more changes coming in and more attributes coming in, this will eventually bloat the controller, this method itself. So instead of using this approach, we could use something like this, right? So what I'm using here is I have used a service class. So I have used service class, and inside the service class itself, I am creating the hotel. So let's like take a sneak peek at it. Yeah. So again, it accepts a data class, hotel data. So I'll explain that to you later. So it creates the hotel, creates the rooms, and then attaches the amenities. And you can see that it accepts a hotel data object. So let's look at the hotel data object. So as I told you earlier, arrays are really cumbersome to handle when it becomes big. But at least when it comes to this this value object, sorry, data trans object, the only place you have to deal with the array is this from array method. So it takes in the data and returns itself. So you can see the constructor itself has all the attributes, and can see the different rooms. It's related to the attribute itself, the hotels itself, and the amenities are also taken as in a collection or an array. You can so this it's easier to handle everything rather than having an array to be handled everywhere. So in the previous example, you could see that these are all arrays. You have to go through loop through every array to handle this. So it's much more easier to continue this, which with a data transfer object. So So a data trans object is something that holds the data of a model. It can be used inside your application between components, like in the example when we created the DTO in the controller request itself. Uh, but when it comes to creating DTUs over and over again, you can see that it takes a lot of effort. I mean, there are a lot, as you saw that there were rooms. So if you create another DTO for the rooms as well as for amenities as well, so it can get really cumbersome because you have to validate data and also return resources. If you are familiar with Laravel, when you are returning data, uh, you have to structure them. So as on the plus side, we have this package called Laravel Data by Sparty, which you can use to manage all the data, because it gives you a request object with validation rules, a resource, and a simple DTO. So you can easily transfer data between your objects, between your classes. So that's about data objects. So let's get into repositories. So personally, I'm not a big fan of repositories, but for the sake of DDD, repositories are a concept in DDD. So um, when it comes to repositories, it's about storing all your queries inside them. So each and every model has a repository. So these repositories can get really bloated as for what we discussed, like fat controllers and fat models. It's really difficult to maintain these as long as you keep putting all your queries inside them. So if you are not using, if you're not putting your queries inside repository, it's pointless even to use them, right? So there is an alternative in Laravel. It's for the if you're using Laravel, you can use builders. So the eloquent builder that is extendable, and you can use it in your Laravel application. So you can look it up in the documentation. It's already there. I'm not going to explain that in very much detail. So that's about query builders. So let's get into services. Yeah. So if you think about services, a service class, as I showed you earlier, is something that holds your business logic, right? So if you look at this, you can see that you take in, you just create, look at the to-do lists that you have, and it sends a notification. But yet again, it's kind of about what repositories do as well. So a query goes in, and then you perform some action upon it, right? So services are a bit cumbersome when it comes to handle, because services, and if you are using services and repositories together, it's in theory it's not possible, but in practice you can. But when it comes to maintaining, it becomes really cumbersome, because when you put queries inside the service and as well as the repository, it kind of creates an inconsistency. So it's going to be difficult when it comes to managing, because you don't know exactly where something has to go. So not a fan of services and repositories being used together. But when it comes to third-party integrations, of course, you can create a service. For example, if your application is going to be integrated with GitHub, you can have a GitHub service. Likewise, for third-party APIs, SDKs, you can use services. So to rule these two, I mean, services and repositories, you can use actions. So why would we use an action? So I'll show you the example of an action. So if you look at this, it just has an execute function. That's the only method it has. And also in the control, you can see how easy it is to execute it. You just call the method and you are done. Okay. So you can see that the previous date data object is being passed into the method, execute method, and the execute method takes care of it. So it executes pretty much from the beginning to the end, and it has only one responsibility. So if you consider solid principles, so the single responsibility principle is covered here. So it's self-contained. An action completes a task from the beginning to the end, as I told you as earlier. So you can also nest actions, because when you when an action takes care of one thing, so there can be dependencies which cascades on, right? So you create an action, maybe you reserve a hotel, and then you pay for the hotel. Likewise, you can embed in those in actions so that you can call them. Also queuable, but not by default. Yet again, you need another package for this. If you're using Laravel, you can use Laravel queuable actions, yet again by Sparty. Um, so if it's a heavy workload, you can offload it onto a queue. So it will process it in the background itself. So also, your actions describe user stories. So exactly, an action class itself tells you exactly what it does. So I'll show you an example. So here I have an example to create hotel action. So if you look at this, I have two domains, the hotel and reservations. So if you want to cancel a reservation, it tells what it does exactly. So it's much more closer to the business language that we speak, rather than using both services and repositories. That's why actions are more advantageous. Okay, so yeah. So I'm going to like skim through this quickly. View models. View models is a way of handling data. It's quite easier to handle view related data with view models. So Laravel has a view model itself built into itself. So it's easier to work with single page applications as well as full stack MVC applications. So if you're using Inertia.js, it would be really easy to handle your view related data. So um, yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so CQRS. So if you have heard this, if you are into microservices, you probably have heard this. So CQRS is to do with, I mean, the meaning itself, command and query responsibility segregation. So a command does an operation. So basically a write operation on the database itself. When it comes to microservices, it's a different animal. So we are not going to discuss that here. But the whole concept is query reads an operation. So it's about segregating these two. So we know that which responsibilities exactly these are handling. So as per what we discussed earlier, actions play the role of a command. So an action tells you exactly what it does. So it pretty much you can handle a write operation through an action. So for reading, if you are passing data onto a view, it's easier to use a view model. So basically CQRS is handled through actions and view models. Okay. So if you want to look into CQRS and microservices, it's another different topic where it has separate databases for reading and writing. So that's a whole another story. So we are not going to discuss this. And when it comes to states and transitions, so this is one of the most um, critical attributes, because I think when it comes to models, you have to change the state of certain things. So for example, I will show you what I have here. So yeah, so I have different states here. So I have used an enum. So I have a cancel state, a reserved state, and a pending state. So you can apply this to any of your projects that you have probably done. So states keep on changing, and what you would have typically done is you would assign the state to the state attribute of a model and then typically save it, right? So instead of doing that, what we have done is we have used an enum, and we have used some classes. You can see that each and every attribute, every value has a class. So so those values are treated as first class citizens in the application itself. So you can see that all of these extends a reservation status class. Okay, so it's an abstract class where you have a method called can be changed. So if your business if you have a business scenario where you have to decide if a state can be changed, you can implement this easily. So you can see that each and every class has this can be changed method implemented. So uh, it's overridden actually. So uh, can be changed, and then what you can do is these states can be used in transition. So if you are changing a state from one to another, you can check if this condition is satisfied, if it can be changed, and then change it. So with the usage of states as classes, this can be really easy. So I will show you this example where we run through this. Okay, so a transition again can be executed. So so this returns a reservation. So what it does is basically it sees if it is uh, the same class, same status. If it's going to be changed into the same status, if not, it will. You can change it to this specific class. So instead of having a string, I mean, like typically what you would do is if these ones there, right? What you would do is this, right? I think most of you have done it in the past, even I have. Okay. So rather than that, it is much better to do it in the object-oriented way. Okay. So yes. So I think we have covered most of this, and yes. So when it comes to advantages and disadvantages of EDD, the technical aspects are quite easy to understand. We developers, of course, make it more complicated because we are technical people. So that's what we do. And there are, and when it comes to disadvantages, it's actually a lot of jargon, technical, I mean, concepts. There are a lot of concepts and a lot of classes to deal with, because as you see that we create a class even for a state. So it's quite difficult to grasp everything. I mean, like if you have been dealing with fat controllers and fat models, this is a huge transition. So you might have to deal with that. So it's a little bit difficult. Uh, but the most important thing is, I mean, these are not strict, I mean, hard and fast rules. Like if you use it 100% or you don't. It's about you adapting and uh, adapting this to your own requirements, right? So yes, so if you have any questions, you can shoot at me. And also I should mention, you can, if you are interested in Laravel and DDD, there is this book called Domain-Driven Design with Laravel by Martin Joe. So most of these examples and this presentation was created with the help of this. So I recommend you read it. And also there are other resources on the internet, but most of them I found them like you needed really like a PhD to understand it. So you can ask me any questions if you have. And I had to rush a bit now because we are limited on time. I'm really sorry about that. But if you have any questions, yes, please do ask me.
All right, thank you so much, Tarinda. I think if there's no questions, feel free, guys, if you do have any questions, to drop them into the comment section as well. That's also okay. But I think we have a second section, which Prasindu will also be sharing. So over to you, Prasindu.
Thank you, Philippa. Hope you guys can hear me. Nice. Thank you, Tarinda, for that informative session on domain-driven development. Let me share my screen really quickly. Right. Let me know, Philippa, can you let me know when you can see my screen?
Yep, perfect. We can see your screen.
Nice. A quick question to the audience. Has anyone worked with test-driven development before? Right. Okay, I think this presentation I have made will be helpful for you. So, right, let me start. Right. So I'm here to give you a small introduction on TDD, which is test-driven development, in the simplest sense as possible. So for those who don't know what TDD means, I will do an introduction in this presentation. So please bear with me. For the moment, just keep in mind that there is a concept called TDD in the industry. To give an overview of an introduction about myself, I'm Prasindu Premaratna. Been working in the industry for nearly 8 years now, primarily in test-driven development in PHP and Laravel. Right. To start off, let me give you an overview of how TDD came into place. I think it's always good to know what the history is. Now, before TDD came into place, we had this traditional way of doing things. First, we get the requirement from which we design the development. Once the design is complete, we go straight into development, and following which we test the development, which is working as intended. Now, with this approach, we face few challenges over the course of time. So testing conducted here does not reflect back to the requirement, but rather to the code. The testing concept on the old school method often results towards the happy path. And once the functionality of the feature is realized, there's a possibility where the testing is omitted completely. So because of this necessity of a new approach came up. And it was decided to bring the testing before the coding. So basically, once the requirement comes in, the development is designed. And once the design is complete, earlier we used to do the coding and then go to testing. But here, things got changed a little bit, and testing came before coding. It's weird, right? Okay, let me explain why, how it works. So by doing this, what happens is we validate the requirement twice. So basically, we validate the requirement in the design phase, and then we validate again in the testing phase. So that is what actually TDD is in very simple terms. So the acronym TDD stands for test-driven development, as I said. And as the name implies, so test is what's driving us as developers to coding. What TDD is a software development approach, which is achieved by writing tests. Now, TDD, it says test-driven development, but it's not primarily about testing. Confusing, right? Okay, let me explain. It's rather about design, where the design is actually evolved through refactoring. So it is developers who write the test and then code. So the base of development process is the tests. We code and refactor it until we pass the tests. Now, just because we have written tests, it doesn't mean that we have followed TDD. These tests can be written even after writing the code, which is plain old unit testing. If we are following TDD, then tests are written before we write the production code. Okay, to simplify things, let me take an example. Let's say we want a function that returns a string called hello world. Before we write the function, what we first do is we write the test to see, okay, I want a string called hello world. And then we run the test, which is obviously going to fail because we haven't written the function yet. Now what we do is we write the function, okay? Here we code and say, okay, return a string called hello world. And that's when the tests are going to pass. That is what TDD is. Now, to simplify things, there is something called a TDD mantra. So here, it's very easy to remember. So we have only 3 aspects. The red denotes the initial step of writing the test without the actual code. So not having the actual code makes the test fail. Then we go to the green, which is we write the code to pass the tests. And afterwards, we have the freedom to refactor and simplify the code. And then we rerun the test again, which will let us know whether we have broken any functionalities or not. So the TDD mantra can be expanded a little bit, which is called the TDD process cycle. So first, we create a test that you will structure based on the requirement. Then what we do is we check by running the test suite if the test suite is running correctly and outputs a failure status. Thirdly, what we do is we write the code and then we run the test again. So if we have coded correctly, what will happen is it will make the test pass. Then, as in the TDD mantra triangle, we can refactor the code to remove any duplications and make the code much more cleaner. So in TDD, there are 3 golden rules. So the first rule is we do not write code unless there is a failing test connected to it. The second rule is we only write the minimum code enough to pass the test. And finally, we make the test only to meet the requirement in the minimum sense. So by following these 3 golden rules, what will happen is your code will be much more cleaner and there will be clarity while maintaining the code integrity. So let me outline the benefits of TDD. So it is always better, it's a better design compared to the traditional way of doing things. Not the other approaches, but the traditional way of doing things. So the developers get a comfort of safer refactoring with TDD because there is a test suite that's back you to say, okay, if you have broken anything in the middle while doing your coding. Another good thing about TDD is it gives you a better code coverage. So as the test suite covers the complete spectrum of the code base, we can be confident about the application. And another nifty fact is for visual output, there is a tool called Xdebug. So basically what it allows you to do is to create coverage reports, which clearly shows what line of codes are covered and not through the test cases that is written. Next, which is an important aspect, is faster debugging. So basically, I know in traditional way of doing things, we have to spend time to, most of the time we spend is on debugging. But when we follow TDD, it becomes quite easy, because by simply running a small command, it will actually gives you exactly where it's broken and how it's broken. So you can simply go and fix it. That's easy, right? So another thing is, since the test cases are written with specificity to the requirement, the code is much more cleaner, and it has much more clarity in it. And also another thing is, it's as a byproduct, it increases the quality of the code, and also it gives you confidence when you follow TDD as a developer. So out of the above, let me elaborate on a few. First, let me talk about code confidence. So this is actually a very crucial factor that is currently towards the lacking side of the industry. Every developer should be confident about the code he or she has written. And TDD provides you an excellent platform for that. So with TDD, the test cases written by simply running the test suite, the developer can ensure and be confident about the code that is written. And you can push it to production without any hesitation. So the next fact I want to talk about is the cleaner code. So since TDD, you build features that is required and in the requirement specification, code base will by default be much more cleaner comparatively. Obviously, developers play a role in this, but this is compared to the traditional way of doing things. Where developers actually, carry on adding features, lines of codes, functionalities, because we developers are, very enthusiastic about coding, and we get too deep into it. So TDD is a way of controlling things. Next, we have to stick to the requirements. Since the tests are governed by the requirement specification, it actually gives you a little bit of control, as I said before. And finally, TDD prevents an application from being overused. So basically, all these attributes contributes towards a cleaner code. Now, in the industry, the big question is whether TDD is slow, which is a very valid question. Yes, TDD is comparatively slow compared to the traditional approaches, but benefits outweigh the time difference. It is statistically proven that with TDD, 60 to 90% of a better output in code can be achieved, with compromising about 15 to 35% of time difference. In my opinion, I think that's a good deal for the output we get. So to write and run test cases, there are something called test frameworks. Here at GapStars, we use PHP and Laravel. So therefore, let me give you some context on that. So with PHP, there are a few test frameworks that enables us to write test cases. They are namely PHP Unit, PHP Spec, and there's another one called Simple Test. With Laravel, you have absolutely nothing to set up to follow TDD. Laravel out of the box comes with PHP Unit, that enables developers to use Laravel and to follow TDD easily. To run your test suite in Laravel, you can simply run a command called PHP arts and test. Yeah, that's it's that simple, I know. And when it comes to tests, there are two types of tests. One is called unit test and another one called feature test. Unit testing is responsible for testing a part of your application in, how do you call it, in isolation. Meaning how it interacts with everything else, but how it processes data and how it handles various scenarios. You can look at this, look at it as how a class, for example, is supposed to work from a developer's point of view. Examples would be models, relationships, mutators. So those can be tested using unit testing. Feature testing can be used to test the smallest working part of your application. Another way to explain these two different types of testing would be unit tests are written from a programmer's perspective. And they are made to ensure that a particular method or a unit of a class performs a set of specific tasks, while functional tests are written from the user's perspective. They ensure that the system is functioning as users are expecting. Okay, let's take an example. Assume a requirement came in to create a car wash management for a car dealership to track if a car needs a wash or if the car age is greater than or equal to 15 days. So when we do this, I want you guys to keep imagining the TDD mantra which I explained to you earlier. Right. So the most difficult thing in TDD is writing your first test case. So here we write our first test case where we check if the car does not need a wash if the car is less than 15 days old. Here we have instantiated the car object and call a method called need a car wash that returns a Boolean response. So this is the first step. We have written a test, nothing else. And then we run the test case. So basically, it's going to fail because we have not created the class, right? That's fine. That's still we are complying with TDD. Now what we do is we create the car class. So we create the car class car, and the function needs car washed, and that will return false because in our test we are checking if the function returns false. So you'll be thinking, why are we hard coding the return as false? Because we write the code in minimum sense to pass the test in TDD. That's all. So because of that, we are going to say return false. Because of that, the test suite will pass. So at this moment, so we have done in the TDD mantra, we have done the red, we have done the green. Now comes to refactor. So at the moment, we don't have nothing to refactor because the code is very simple. So we move on. We go back to the triangle the red. So next, we need to see if the car has an age. Because in the requirement, it states that the car's age threshold is 15 days. So we write the additional test to see the car has an age. Again, we instantiate the car object and then call the attribute age and check if it's 0. Again, we run the test case and it's going to fail because we haven't added an age property into the car class. So we move back to the car object and then declare the property with the age property with the default value of 0. So yeah, then that will make the test to pass, and we are back again in green in the TTD mantra. Now we can go back, and so we can create a private static variable called default age with a default value of 0 and call it in the constructor. Not only the code, we can actually refactor the tests as well. So since the car object is instantiated in both tests, what we can do is we can add that into the setup function where it instantiates when the test is called. The green, if whether we have broken anything while doing that refactor. Now we need to set an age for the car. So because in the requirement we are only washing the car if it's greater than or equal, which accepts integer parameter to check if the age is what we added. Now we run the test case again, and it fails since there's no method called setAge. So what we do when we are following TDD is now we go back to the function class and we write the function setAge, which accepts a parameter as a as set to the age attribute, which overrides the default value of 0. So likewise, you can keep repeating that process where you go to red, green, refactor, red, green, refactor. That is simply what TDD is. It's very simple, nothing more. That's exactly what it is. So let me quickly move into, yeah, so that is what TDD is in very simple terms. It's not hard, right? So if you have, hope you all enjoyed the session. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to say it here or to reach me out in my email address. Yeah, Mohammed.
Yeah, person to a small question.
Yeah.
So to be honest, like we have been practiced the TTD with our client in because they didn't practice that one. That was an old project. What we work with Symfony, but the project is pretty much old. It was migrated from Zen to the Symfony. So then already when we onboarding, partially, I mean, almost 50% of the system is built. So we had this issue, like, the bugs are overcoming always. So I proposed the TTD to get rid of these things, and we practiced that. But as you said, when you follow the test coverage from the Xdebugger, we can see the coverage of entire system. So
Yes.
the coverage never going to be 100% as the system is old, because it was not tested, followed the TDD. So question one is, like, such a big system, kind of an old system where we don't have practice or don't have the unit test, so TDD approach is there. How to justify those coverage are not going to fulfill, because it's going to be expensive to do the entire coverage for the entire system because it's old. So other one is, we feel like we try to cover those things, but as you mentioned, it's taking more time and it's a bit expensive. So what do you think about that? What should be the solution, or how to practice that in such a old system?
So Mohammed, thank you very much for the question. So basically, in a legacy system that you haven't practiced TDD, practically there will be challenges when you go into implement TDD. So in practical scenario, in perfect world, what I would suggest is you to invest some time and resources to cover up that missed out aspects in the application, to cover the full spectrum of the code base. But practically, I understand that it is going to be a very expensive task. So if in that case, it's actually a business decision. It's not a developer's decision whether not to attempt and cover that test coverage, or whether you're going to start from where you're going to introduce TDD into the project. So to answer your question, it's actually a business decision. Either you can, if the business, if all the stakeholders are in the agreement where, okay, from this point onwards, you are going to follow TDD, and from this point onwards, we are covering all the code bases that we introduce into the system by practicing TDD, or else we are going to resources where we do the backlog of test cases and cover the code base that hasn't been covered from your test suite. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Basindu. Yeah, I think sort of the same solution we had taken in this scenario, but it will take time for, as you mentioned, time and it's expensive to coverage all the scenario, but it's again on stakeholder decision. Thanks, Basindu. It's answered my question.
Exactly. Yeah, Chaminda. Hello.
Chaminda, did you have a question?
I think you're on mute, Chaminda.
Yeah, I'm on mute.
Yeah, sorry, my mic was muted. Can you hear me on?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. Yeah, Pasindu, thanks for the session. I have one small question, Pasindu. Now, actually, I'm also from the same team as Zumri. Now, when you say we practice TDD, so the proper way to get around it is to start writing unit tests first. Yeah. When coming to that, sometimes when you're writing the test, we might face situations like we have to we need the sample data, right? So in that case, we'll have to create our models, migrations, things like that. So before writing the test, if we need sample data, we have to go and create them, right?
Right. So, Chaminda, there's a concept called factories where you can actually quickly create sample data. And most of the time when you're designing test cases, you use factories to see those dummy data.
Right. Actually, the factories now in Laravel, the concept actually factory is directly related with the model.
Yeah.
Right. So we have to have the model as well when you're creating the factory. So we cannot actually do pure write the test first, but we have to have the models or rather the entities identified before we start doing the writing the test, right?
No. So basically, Chaminda, before, now let's say you have a brand new Laravel project. Before you create if you follow TDD to teeth, what you do first is you write the test case. Now, when you write the test case, you expect that there are no models and you will come across a lot of errors. That is what exactly TDD is. You don't write any production code. You don't create models. You don't create factories. You don't create seeders. You don't do anything. So basically, you write the test, face all the issues, and then you step by step solve that issues. Then your first problem would be model not found. Okay, I'll create the model. Then relationship not found. Okay, you create the relationship. So likewise, you resolve each problem step by step and up until the test is actually passed. You don't start with models, or you don't start with any of the production code.
Oh yeah, I got it, Basindya. But I think it like the time is the factor again, because if you take an example, the same example you mentioned, like the car. So suppose we write the test case and we like initiate an object of car model, then we'll not have a car model defined, right? So first, when the test runs, it will try to resolve the car model, but it will fail,
Yes.
right? So then we have to create the model, then we have to come back and resolve the namespace of the model, and then do the
Yes.
test again. So it's an iterative process, right? So
That's very true. That's
yeah.
exactly what
So
it is.
so I believe it's back to square one. That's it's gonna take a lot of time, I think. But in the end, it will
Comparatively,
pay off, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So comparatively, it is proven that TDD is a little bit slower than the other approaches, but the benefits actually outweigh that time you spend.
Okay. Thanks for your answer, Basindo.
You're welcome.
I think we have some questions in the comment box as well. So what is the influence to the development time of developer when you use TDD?
What is the influence to the development time of developer when we use TDD? What is the influence to the development time? So basically, if I understood this question correctly, it's the same answer that I gave Chaminda as well. So TDD relatively will take a little bit more time, but it is justifiable because the benefits you gain from following TDD is actually outweighs that time you spend. So the influence would be compared to the traditional approaches, TDD will take a little bit more development time. So yeah. And there's another question, which is, can TDD cover all the test cases in web application? Test-driven development is not technology tech stack specific. It's a software development approach where you can use it into any form of it. You can use it to Java, you can use it on PHP, you can use it in ASP.NET. So you can use it in it's independent from tech stack. And I think there's another question from Prisha.
Yes, I'm also at the same team. So my question is both TDD related and DDD related. So the question is like, and in DDD we have seen like there are so many classes or the structures that we have to include. So for the test also, do we need to have the same sort of a structure, or does it need to be on the same place that the Rebel default we add the test, the features and the unit, or do we need to maintain the structure there as well? Because in DDD we can the control can be if we take the example, the rooms control can be in some other place, the hotel control can be in some other place. But in the test folder, do we need two classes, or can we cover that in the same test case?
Yes, I mean, if you follow the same structure as you do for the domains, if you design the domains in a certain way, it's better to have the tests in that way as well. Because when it comes to controllers as well, I usually don't put that in the domains. because I structure them separately because the controllers are not to deal with the business logic. Okay, so DDD is about dealing with the business logic. So controllers are about passing data back and forth. So I'd rather structure the test cases in the way models are structured. The domains are structured, and maybe the controllers in a separate folder as controllers. And if you are specifically, designing the controls for web or API, you can put those in separate folders and follow the same structure. So you know exactly that it's in the same structure. So it is easy to identify where the test cases are.
And what is it related to in the DDD structure, right?
Pardon?
No. So that you can identify quickly, like what is the DDD?
Yes, exactly.
related to
Because the folder structure is
Yep.
the same as what you have implemented in the domains.
Okay.
As for the test cases, yeah.
Okay.
All right, guys, do we have any
Tarin,
more questions?
Yeah, I have one question, just related to the same the answer given by Tarinder to Krishal's question. And now, if you are going for microservices, and like maybe later, if you have the controllers in one directory, how would you like separate them later down the road if you're gonna isolate them later?
Yeah,
in
yet again,
several
that's
servers?
about preference. Like if you are going to deal with microservices later, it's going to be a little cumbersome when you have to, go back and forth between controllers. Maybe that's a design decision that you have to make if you are moving into microservices. But in the case of an MVC application or an SPA or a typical Laravel application, you can, it's your preference. I prefer to put them in a separate folder because of the reason I gave you. Yeah,
but I think DDD is like specifically targeting microservice. Am I correct?
Not exactly. DDD is useful. Like if you are moving into microservices, yes, your statement is correct. But if you have quite a large application, like considerably large application, like having everything in models and controllers, it's going to be like really difficult to maintain them. When the models become fat and the controllers become fat, it's going to run for thousands of lines of code. So breaking down them into smaller classes and having a proper structure, DDD really helps you there.
Yeah, actually, now I think single action controllers are now being practiced more often. So, what do you think about that?
Well, I think those are very straightforward. So because it tells you exactly what the class does. So rather than having, when it comes to solid principles, the single responsibility principle is covered simply there. And also it's exactly the same as your business language. So it tells you exactly what your client talks. It's that simple.
Yeah, in your opinion, is it a good practice or bad
Yes,
practice?
it is a good practice. So as I explained earlier, like rather than having services and repositories, there yet again you have to deal with queries back and forth. You sometimes you get lost where to deal with the queries exactly. Sometimes, like if you are using a repository, pretty much all the queries go in the repositories. And yet again, when you come to services, you deal with a query and you perform some action. So rather than that, using both of those, actions are a good replacement for both of those.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I'm done with questions, Philippa. You can continue.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions that they want to share with Tarinder and Pasundu? No, okay. Well, yeah, we can wrap this up. Thank you, everybody, for joining the event tonight. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us, learning about building robust PHP applications and domain-driven design, unit testing with the GapStars team. A big, massive thank you to both Prasindu and Tarinda. You've both taken the time to prepare and share your knowledge this evening. Thank you so much. We all really, really appreciate it. We will be having a follow-up session in the coming weeks to deep dive into these subjects a little bit further. We'll invite you into the GapStars office and we can have an event here. The invitation will be dropping into your inbox in the coming days, so keep an eye out for it. We will be sharing those details in the next few days. Thank you again, Prasindu and Tarinda. We really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great evening.
Have a great evening. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.